Hi, class. Welcome to Psych 543, Week 3. This is the second video of the week. I will be giving a lecture on Chapter 3 in our Foundations of Addictions Counseling. We are going to be looking at process addictions, which these, for me personally, are the most interesting. That's a subjective comment, I realize, but these are less commonly talked about, so they're really important to learn about. Before I get started, I just want to say that I hope all of you are doing well. I've been enjoying reading your discussions, and I'm really impressed with your contributions so far, so keep it up. So, process addictions. Now, addiction can occur in many forms. A lot of times we think substance abuse. However, there are different forms that can become very problematic. Often it is assumed that physical dependence characterized by withdrawal symptoms is required in order for someone to be diagnosed with an addiction disorder. However, a behavioral addiction can occur with all the same negative consequences in a person's life, minus the physical issues faced by people who compulsively engage in drug and alcohol abuse. There can be physical consequences with certain process addictions, like food addictions. It is the compulsive nature of the behavior that is often indicative of the behavior's addiction or process addiction in an individual. So these individuals continually engage in an activity or behavior despite the negative impact on the person's ability to remain mentally and or physically healthy, and also their ability to function in the home and community. The person may find the behavior rewarding psychologically, or they may actually get a high while engaged in the activity. But later it often comes with a sense of guilt, shame, remorse, or even feeling overwhelmed by the consequences of the continued choice. Unfortunately, as it is common for all who struggle with addiction, people living with behavioral addictions are unable to stop engaging in the behavior for any length of time without some type of treatment or intervention. So examples of process addictions, and some that we will review today, are gaming, food, sex, shopping, exercise. Though almost everyone engages in all the activities listed above, we all shop, we all probably have experienced gambling, we all eat, most of us exercise. And to a certain degree, we enjoy these things, but it is not termed as an addiction or a process addiction until the person begins to struggle with mental health or physical health issues that are consequences of the behavior and the inability to stop. So when we're practicing with clients, it's very important to assess the impact it's having on different domains of their lives. So is it affecting their relationships? Is it affecting their work? Is it affecting their ability to perform in school? The person has difficulties in significant relationships at home and in some cases at work because their behaviors are so disrupted. So it's either always on their mind, they're really preoccupied, or they are having some type of like withdrawal or physical ailment due to certain ones, such as like binge eating. The person experiences other negative consequences that are directly caused by continued extreme or chronic engagement in the behavior. So, for example, a person with gambling addiction may gamble away the house. They may lose their job and be forced into bankruptcy because they've spent all of their money and more on their gambling addiction. Despite these consequences, just like substance use, the person continues to engage. So these are serious, these are real, and it's very important to be educated on these, as I guarantee you'll work with people with different forms of process addictions. So the term process addiction is an addiction to a behavior, process, or action. It is still debated. It was not until recently, actually, not until about the 1970s and 80s, that the addiction field began to formally discuss the idea, even just the idea, that a behavior can be diagnosed as an addictive behavior. So these are also mood-altering, have mood-altering effects on us, and they have mood-altering chemicals that are released in our brain. So dopamine is released when someone is shopping, or these people kind of get a high from the behavior. Past research on addiction focused on the presence of physical dependence to the substance or behavior as demonstrated by tolerance and withdrawal. But current research claims physical dependence is no longer necessary to diagnose an addiction to a substance or behavior. So we don't need a physical dependence in order to be addicted. There is still a lot of unknown in the clinical world and addiction world of the prevalence of these. And that is, because the criteria is not clearly defined. So not all process addictions are currently listed in the most updated version of the DSM. A number of addiction specialists, including the International Association of Addiction and Offender Counselor Committee on Process Addictions, actually advocated that the newly published DSM, which is the DSM-5, that's the most current, and that was released in 2013, include diagnostic categories of addictive disorders containing subtypes for gambling, sex, spending, work, exercise, internet, and eating. However, gambling was interestingly the only disorder included in the revised section, addictive disorders, in the newly released DSM-5. There is binge eating now, which is new to the DSM-5 as well. Currently, there remains a lack of agreement regarding common terminology throughout the multidisciplinary fields of addiction counseling, especially language pertaining to process addiction. So there's still a lot of controversy, there's still a lot of debate, and there's still a lot of gray area in these forms of addictions. And comorbidity is common, so it is very rare that you are going to come across a client who only has a mere gambling addictions. And when I say mere, I don't mean that lightly, but I just mean that we know comorbidity means more than one diagnosis, right, occurring at the same time. So addiction, it is important to keep in mind that frequently addiction to one substance or process is accompanied or replaced by addiction to another substance or process. So say someone lets go, what usually happens, think about it this way, what usually happens when someone quits smoking? Think about it for a couple of seconds. So usually, I guess that question was kind of vague, but usually if someone is successful in quitting their smoking, they replace it with something new, right? So that's why a lot of times you hear someone who was a former smoker say, once I quit smoking, I gained a lot of weight. And that is because they might have replaced that urge or that desire or that need for something with food. So a female with an eating disorder is also struggling with, usually a lot of times they're also struggling with a substance abuse or dependence, or a male recovering from a sexual addiction develops a gambling addiction because they haven't worked through the core stuff. So it's so important to dig deeper with these clients, and they need to do the work, or else a different form of addiction usually presents itself. So like I said, I believe it was in my last lecture, trauma is at the core of most of people who develop an addiction. So that's why it is so important, you guys, to really get at the root of it, because eliminating it, abstinence doesn't usually last. Usually something else will emerge, and it's usually an unhealthy coping strategy. So warning signs similar to those for substance abuse. There's a lot of overlap here. Lots and lots of overlap. Although they don't always have the physical piece, the psychological piece, and the feeling that is achieved when using is very similar. They're parallel to each other. It is critical for us as counselors to distinguish a process addiction from other types of behavior that may lead to negative consequences. For example, displaying undesirable social behavior. A person struggling with an addiction, whether it be process or substance, is engaging in behavior marked by occasion, compulsion, and significant life impairment. Someone engaged in violating a social taboo, such as discussing sexual practices in social settings or eating certain foods, may experience awkward silences as social regrets, but this is not an addiction. So again, it's important to understand what is really just behavior versus, undesirable social behavior versus what is a process addiction. So if an individual experiences euphoria while compulsively and obsessively discussing sexual practices in social settings, even after ongoing patterns of negative consequences related to the behavior, so for example, like being fired from a job because they couldn't focus, then us as counselors would be advised to evaluate further for an addictive pattern. So if a client comes to you and talks about their, need to shop all the time, or that their coping skill is shopping. Well, is that just poor self-control or lack of coping skills, or are they actually receiving a euphoric state when they are shopping? Are they buying things that they don't even need? So it's really, really important to have a thorough assessment, and that piece that you're looking for is that state of euphoria while engaging in that behavior. Now, it's kind of like kleptomania, right? So kleptomania, the DSM defines kleptomania as someone who has an urge to steal, but they're not stealing because of they need something. So they're not stealing because, I need a TV and I can't afford it, or I need more clothes, but I can't pay for them, so I'm going to shoplift. They are stealing for the high. They are stealing because of the feeling that they get when they are walking out of the store not paying for the item. So it's very similar. So moving on to sexual addiction, there's actually no DSM criteria for sexual addiction, which is surprising. 3% of U.S. adults have a sexual addiction, and actually 20 to 25% of women engage in some type of sexual addiction. So a range of 20 to 40% of sex addicts are thought to be struggling with another addiction, such as alcoholism. So that's that comorbid piece. And the incidence of sexual addiction is on the rise because of increased affordability, easy access to sexual material, and the anonymity. So being able to remain anonymous on the internet, right? We have so much at our fingertips now with the power of the internet. So we're seeing an increased numbers in sexual addiction. So there are varying definitions. Like I said, there's not one specific criteria. Addicted to lust is one of them. Loss of control, and that is used in Sexaholics Anonymous. The sexaholic can no longer determine what is right or wrong. So they've really lost sight of appropriate versus inappropriate behavior. They've lost control, lost power of choice, and is not free to stop sexual behavior despite the adverse consequences, such as losing partners, losing family, things like that. Common characteristics of male and female sexaholics include marked isolations, prevalent guilt, marked depression, and a deep feeling of emptiness. So typical behaviors of a sexaholic include compulsive fantasizing about sexual desires, remaining in harmful codependent relationships, so really unhealthy, unstable relationships, engaging in compulsive masturbation, so that's happening excessively, that's multiple times a day, over, way over what's considered like a healthy, normal amount. Obsessive and compulsive use of pornography, including on the internet. Continuing to engage in promiscuous sexual relationships, conducting adulterous affairs, and compulsively pursuing exhibitionism or sexually abusive relationships, regardless of legal, career, or family consequences. So that exhibitionism, if you haven't heard of that term yet, is in the compulsion of, or the urge to display one's genitals in public without anyone's consent, so kind of catching people off guard. Progressive path to increasingly dangerous behaviors, so that's another thing that comes with it. These people are at greater risk for picking up some type of STD. So potential behaviors of sexual addiction, again, despite the negative consequences, everything that I stated above, the fantasizing, the masturbation, use of pornography, dangerous, promiscuous sexual affairs. And these also come with the same negative consequences that a lot of other addictions come with, including that depression, guilt, isolation. So I want to just kind of take a moment and talk about cybersex. It's another term often referred when discussing sex addiction. This involves internet-related sexually oriented chat rooms, message boards, and pornography. Again, you're able to remain anonymous on the internet, so more people are apt to going this route. There's telephone sex and differential diagnosis also add complications. So here's another critical piece when you're working in the field. As you probably learned, I don't know if you guys have taken psychopathology, but differentiating diagnoses are really key to ruling out incorrect diagnoses. So, when someone's manic, they often have hypersexual behaviors. So that comes with mania. They're promiscuous because of the state that they're in, the manic state that they're in. So it's recommended that we as therapists evaluate carefully and obtain adequate psychosocial history before making a final diagnosis. So are you engaging in, is this sex addiction happening 24/7? Is it there all the time? Or do you have a diagnosis of bipolar, and is it only part of the manic states? Often treatment for sexual addictions involve many treatment approaches used for like the substance addictions, which we'll get into later on in the semester. But these could include COG-B, cognitive behavioral therapy. But there are additional biological approaches such as hormonal therapy and pharmacological approaches like antidepressants can also be used. Gambling addiction. This is under impulse control disorder, pathological gambling. So, it's this one comes with an increased amount of money to maintain excitement, lies to conceal the problem, relies on others because, for the money, because they are so in debt that they need others to pay for their addiction. And there are certain brain changes and tolerance and withdrawal that come with gambling addictions. So, like I said, there's a tolerance and withdraw piece here. So some of the descriptors for a person with a gambling disorder indicate that the person needs to gamble with increasing amount of money in order to achieve the same desired excitement. So what does that sound like? You guys think about it. Sounds like the substance, right? Tolerance that's built when um, engage in a lot of substance use. So lies to conceal the extent of involvement with gambling and relies on others to provide money to relieve desperate financial situations. Gamblers do not ingest a substance to experience their high, but research has found that disordered gambling is related to neuroadaptation or tolerance and withdrawal symptoms. So, your brain is being stimulated. So think about when you go to Vegas or go to just a local casino. What is generally, when you think of it, what do you think about? Well, there are a lot of lights. There are those gambling machines, the noises, the music that they play, maybe the smell of smoke. So that is kind of releasing that dopamine, and it's activating our reward system in our brain. So all of the same negative consequences, secrecy, increased spending, unexplained time away, increased debt and worry over finances. And why do you think there's increased alcohol or drug consumptions? Well, yeah, because casinos, that's what they're all about, right? They're giving you all the free drinks you want as long as you're spending money. So inevitably, people are going to use more. Often disorders such as substance use, depressiveness, anxiety, and personality disorders are present and comorbid with gambling disorders. So this should also be taken into consideration when you're either evaluating someone or treating someone. Work addiction, also known as workaholism. We've all heard that term, oh, you're a workaholic, or he's a workaholic, but there's actually it's a real thing, although it's not recognized as a diagnosis yet. And because there's little data and availability on the prevalence, it does become problematic. So it's actually socially accepted, right? Encouraged and rewarded. There's more research needed, but I want you guys to kind of think about how our culture rewards this. Why is it, have you had experiences of feeling like the pressure to work more and lose, kind of put your self-care on the back burner? And how come? So I kind of want to leave you with that. And I want you to kind of ponder on that a little bit. The symptoms of a work addiction include dissatisfaction and less acting. So if you're taking a break, maybe you feel guilty. Fast paced, it's go, 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 go. Maybe a lot of multitasking, perfectionism. So being really hard on oneself if they take a break or they make a mistake. Inability to delegate. There's health complaints, stress, anger, depression, self-esteem problems. Workaholics do things in excess. So they keep a quick pace and do not feel satisfied with themselves unless they're always doing something. Like I said, taking a break leads to feelings of guilt and like I should be doing something. As a result, workaholics tend to have more than one addiction, perhaps as many as 20% of them. They usually drink, smoke, or do drugs as a way to cope with all their stress. They also, and if you think about it, it makes sense, may have strict eating and exercise regimes in order to have enough energy to sustain such a fast-paced lifestyle. So they either may restrict or just not be getting enough calories because they're so busy, or they might be eating like have an unhealthy diet like fast food because they don't have a lot of time, or they might just be stress eating. These efforts to cope help hide what is truly going on and prolong the individual's denial. family, friends, and coworkers experience the negative side effects, or the negative effects that come with workaholism. So the individual's not available, right, for their families or loved ones. A common myth, though, about workaholics is that since they work longer hours, they're more productive. And so maybe someone says, oh, it's good to be a workaholic. Or I had a client who, actually, I'm currently seeing a client who is actually in a graduate program, and she is, and I'm changing demographic information just due to confidentiality purposes, obviously, but she is a perfectionist and struggles with allowing herself to make mistakes, very hard on herself, feels guilty when taking a break, doesn't allow herself to engage in a lot of self-care. And something that she told me was, well, I'm scared that if I don't put this much pressure on myself, that the quality of my work is going to diminish. Well, research shows that workaholics actually tend to be less productive than the more relaxed worker who keeps regular hours and takes care of themselves. So research shows, because that's a normal fear, that's a common fear that you're going to hear with this type of population and process addiction. But research shows that no, your work will actually maybe even improve. It will not go down, but it might improve even. And why do you think? Well, because I'm healthy. I'm taking care of myself. I'm well nourished. I'm not burnt out. So that kind of, it makes sense if you really think about it. I know I'm talking fast, you guys. Like I said, these are so interesting to me, and I enjoy teaching about these because it's critical for us to understand. So I'm going to just pause. I'm going to take a deep breath because I recognize that I'm going fast. And I suggest you do the same right about now. So moving on to compulsive buying. Compulsive buying has been defined as consistent, repetitive purchasing that becomes the first response to negative or stressful life events or feelings. We've all heard the term retail therapy, right? Well, that could be a real thing. It could be a real clinical disorder. Compulsive buyers try to fill the meaningless and unhappiness and voids in their lives by purchasing items to relieve those negative feelings. So shopaholism is consistent overspending, and it could even lead to debt and bankruptcy. So for that brief, couple seconds that however long their high lasts, it is a moment away from the feelings of emptiness and whatever caused that emptiness, trauma, an adverse childhood experience. This is their coping skill. So there's an estimated prevalence of 6% of the U.S. population. While previously thought to affect mostly women, which was something that I believed too, experts say it actually equally affects men. Media messages support actually this, and I want you to kind of think about why. I invite you to think about how the media has supported this and how might it affected your life or someone you love in their life. They point out that it's important to keep in mind when examining and diagnosing a compulsive buyer that we live in a consumer-driven society fueled by powerful messages urging buyers to spend, right? So what do you see on commercials? What billboards do you see? Especially technology these days. We're always hearing about, you get the iPhone and then like 2 days later, the next version comes out and it's bigger, it's better, it's higher quality. So, we're kind of always satiated with these new updated products. And a lot of times they're expensive. The message tells us that buying things will enhance our self-esteem, make us happy, and increase social status. Strategies such as teaching individuals how to resist powerful marketing messages and examine the social forces at work may be useful. So also kind of think about yourself. I know I certainly have been a victim, have been a victim, I guess, for lack of a better term, of this, where I felt like I needed the newest thing in order to feel good. But, when you think about it, if it's great for a while, right? But then your problems are still there. In the state of the economy and easy access to credit, it can also fuel the compulsive buyer. So it's important to continue to gather data regarding prevalence and patterns associated with compulsive buying in order to better understand this type of process addiction. So I believe that it's getting worse because of all of the marketing and technology and, all of the smart technology. It's very available to us. And moving on to food addiction and disordered eating. One of my specialties, I did my dissertation on anorexia. So food addiction and disordered eating. Well, there's some argument that eating disorders are not a form of addiction, but some believe that there are. I certainly do. And for purposes of this class, they are classified as addictions. Food addiction and disordered eating come with preoccupation with food, appearance, and weight. There's issues of control, acceptance, and poor self-esteem. There are a lot of similarities to the chemical addictions. And there are self-help groups like Overeaters Anonymous that are also 12-step processes like alcohol, NA, and those types of groups. So anorexia, just to do some differentiating between them, let me first say that let me just back up a couple seconds. So experts who claim that eating disorders like anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating are addictions argue that individuals suffering with these disorders often share common traits with those addicted to alcohol or drugs. So there's a lot of overlap, and the overlap will be things such as obsession, compulsion, denial, shame, tolerance, withdrawal symptoms, and even cravings. Anorexia is a compulsive self-starvation. So this affects about 0.4% of women, and it's believed to be increasing. I do want to point out that men are also susceptible and not immune. So I've done a lot of research on male anorexia because it's not talked about a lot. And a lot of times I've done some presentations on it, and a lot of the responses that I get are, wow, I didn't know males could suffer from this. I had no idea. Males are just as, we don't have as much research on it, and the prevalence is lower. It's about 1 in 10 males. So 90% are females and 10% are males, but that's probably inaccurate because a lot of times these males are misdiagnosed, or it goes unnoticed. So they might be misdiagnosed with depression. Oh, you're losing weight because you're depressed. So that's probably an inaccurate number. So I want you to be cognizant of that. So this is not just a female disorder. It's not just, there have been myths or that it's a white female problem, but it goes beyond that, and it's certainly no one is immune. So anorexia is classified as someone who starves themselves and undergoes excessive weight loss. Some of the symptoms includes refusal to maintain a normal body weight for height, body type, age, and activity level. So they might be like prepubescent, meaning like someone who's 27 might have like a body of a 12-year-old. So they might look like their body might look like they are 12. And there's an intense fear of weight gain. So even if someone doesn't think that they're fat, the fear is that they are going to gain weight. There's a loss of menstrual periods. And This was recently changed in the DSM-5 because a lot of times females with anorexia will have it'll have a period, but it will be artificial, meaning that they will be on some type of birth control, producing a period. However, without birth control, they would not have a menstrual cycle. There's also the continuing, and with males, let me add this, males would have reduced testosterone levels. So they may have feelings of feeling fat, and they have an extreme obsessive concern with their body weight and shape. And these individuals don't lose their appetite. So there's a lot of misconception that anorexic people don't have appetites when they do. They certainly do. They've just learned to control it. They've learned to ignore it. More symptoms of anorexia include weighing 15% below what is expected for their age and height. An individual with anorexia may have a low tolerance for change in new situations, so they're very rigid. It's hard for them to kind of go outside their box. They probably will isolate themselves. They may fear growing up and taking charge of his or her own life. So a lot of times you'll see older individuals still very dependent on their parents. And the dieting may represent avoidance of ineffective attempts to cope with demands of new stages of life. So a lot of times, if it's not triggered by trauma or some type of adverse experience, it's triggered by moving on to a different phase of life. So it's someone is scared to get older and become more independent, gain that responsibility. So they kind of regress back into a state where they are being coddled or taken care of, things like that. I've worked with clients who said that they fear getting better because they fear that no one's going to love them anymore like they do, or no one's going to take care of them like they get taken care of when they're sick. So this one's very complex. I mean, we could have a full class on eating disorders. If you have more questions, please, please, please reach out. I have a lot of information on this, but I will move on for sake of time. Bulimia is a compulsive cycle of eating and binging and purging. 1 to 4% of women. Males are also non-immune. Bulimia nervosa is classified as a compulsive cycle of binge eating and then purging. So these individuals will consume large amounts of foods in short periods of time. And when I say large amount of foods, I mean like 5,000 to 7,000 calories in one sitting. So over a day's worth. And to try to get rid of it, they use compensatory behaviors. So purging can not only mean vomiting, but it could be use of laxatives or excessive exercise. So symptoms include repeated cycle of binging and purging, frequent dieting, extreme concern with body weight and shape, feeling out of control. So that's the feeling of being out of control is a big one. And also eating beyond the point of fullness. So really, really going above and beyond. And a thing too here to note is that bulimia isn't obvious. So a lot of times these individuals are a normal weight or even maybe overweight because when your food starts to digest as soon as you put it into your mouth. So really you get rid of about half the calories, if that, when you purge. So it's really impossible to get rid of all of the calories, which in turn leads to weight gain. You might see things like their teeth get kind of corrupt, or they might look kind of swollen, and there are certain internal consequences. It's very, very unhealthy. Impulse control can be a problem for people with bulimia, and lack of control may also extend to risky behaviors such as shoplifting, sexual behaviors, and alcohol or other drug use. A lot of times these people will have, those with bulimia will also have a substance use disorder. Anorexia, not as much. as bulimia, and a lot of times anorexics, and that is because of their fear of weight gain. Moving on to binge eating disorder. So this is pretty much the same as bulimia minus the purging behavior. This is the most common type of eating disorder, as 30 million people have this. So when you see someone really overweight, usually they have a binge eating disorder. And this was recently recognized in our most current DSM, the DSM-5. So an individual with binge eating disorders engage in random fasting and diets and feels extreme shame and self-hatred after binging. These individuals tend to eat really fast and in secret, so they're alone. They might eat in the dark or in their car, and are very depressed and obese. So other eating disorders include a combination of symptoms from anorexia, bulimia, purging, night eating, and binge eating disorder. So that goes beyond the class. There's like a diagnosis in the DSM called eating disorder not otherwise specified, where people don't quite fit into one category. But we'll just focus on these three for now. So that sums it up pretty much. I know there was a lot there. I know I talked really fast at times. So if the great thing is you could go back and re-listen if you need to. If you have any questions, please ask them. There are some useful websites here that I always recommend. I know that you are limited on your time. I certainly understand that this is not your only class, but at least maybe bookmark these websites, because you never know what population you're going to end up working with, or even if you're currently working in the abuse field, it is very helpful to have these resources to refer back to. Okay. I'm looking forward to viewing your presentations. I know that not only do I teach you guys certainly teach me too. So I'm looking forward to learning new things, and I will see you in week 4.